this is my principal position. Journalism in South Africa is not broken. Why? Journalism in South Africa is lauded among the best in the world. So this thing of flogging an entire industry based on one or two examples which I can opine that is actually ill-fated, because it's not a true sample of the state of journalism.
Is South African journalism in crisis? Well, judging by the absolute monster fight that happened within the South African media industry just the other day, you might think that it is. After the terrible building fire that took more than 70 lives in Johannesburg CBD just the other week, there was a massive fight all over Twitter. I'm not calling it X, I'm an adult. It's called Twitter. Here's what happened. Iconic South African broadcaster Redi Tlhabi, who most recently was the host of the breakfast show for the BBC World Service. She's a superstar and an icon in South African journalism. Redi Tlhabi came out and absolutely rinsed all of the young journalists pretty much who were on the scene reporting live from the building fire. She said that they were basically glorified microphones, that they weren't asking any of the politicians who were on site any tough questions without challenging these politicians' assertions about illegal immigrants or about slumlords or about NGOs or about different other political parties being neglectful, which allowed this fire to happen. And Redi Tlhabi said that this was symbolic of an entire industry where standards had fallen away, where young journalists weren't being trained properly, they weren't being upheld to good editorial standards. Other legendary journalists from that generation of broadcasters piled in, saying that this made a terrible story all the much worse because incorrect, non-fact-checked, politically dominated narratives about why this awful tragedy occurred became the story. And then younger journalists, people who are actually on the beat, on the ground now, clapped back. They said, one, journalism is not the same as it used to be when you, Redi and co. were at the top of the game. It is poorly funded, under-resourced, everybody is being paid worse and made to work way harder in the modern era because you're competing with social media, because you're competing with the digital landscape. You don't have the time or the luxury to go and do serious research, dig to the bottom of things, take your time, write an article, call somebody, get it fact-checked, when you've got to create dozens of articles a week, when you're chasing clickbait, when you're trying to get the most views, the most streams, get the story out first. The older generation, Redi Tlhabi and co., clapped back and said, but we're not asking you to do anything unreasonable in cases like this. When you're on the scene with the opportunity to interview these crucial, powerful people who've got their own agendas, we just want you to ask the tough questions, to have done the research, to know what you're talking about, and to have a sense of the most important things that these politicians need to be taken to task for, because these crucial first moments in those interviews are going to shape the dominant stories about this tragedy, because they're going to spread first online. So this conversation is bigger than journalism. Sure, it upset a lot of journalists in the industry, but it also affects all of us because the quality of journalism in a country dictates how well the country is doing. If your journalism industry is in crisis, then your country is in a really bad way. So here's an interview with Qaanitah Hunter, one of the most prolific and talented young journalists in South Africa. She's one of the youngest prominent editors. She's an assistant editor at News 24. She's on a bunch of different journalism forums and interest groups that help journalists handle what it means to be a journalist in 2023. And here's us talking about whether or not journalism in South Africa is in a terrible state of crisis. This is the issue with modern journalism in South Africa. Okay, Qaanitah Hunter, I'm pretty sure I know the answer to this, and you are not obligated, but would you like a beanie for the interview? Would you like a beanie for the interview?
Of course.
Do you want one of the core casts? Like, you can have one of these, or I've got a vote one, which Musi Mamane gave me. I don't know if that compromises your independent.
I'm here for the purple.
Okay, there's also
okay, we could green.
The load shedding beanie.
Let's do the load
shedding. Would you put it on?
Yes, let's do the load shedding beanie.
Nobody's worn the load shedding beanie before. That's very good.
Let's do we are in load shedding.
I'm so appreciative of you putting it on.
Listen.
Shine bright.
It's my fit. I think it works.
It does look very cute.
I feel like it's intentionally done.
Yes, exactly. Qaanitah Hunter, is South African journalism broken? Because the last 2 weeks on Twitter, you even went back onto Twitter. You never go on Twitter, and you arose to have a fight with Zakesmda. What was it like amongst the journos last week in this huge fight?
So I don't play in Elon Musk's backyard called X. I hate it. It is the ghetto. You hardly find me there. There was a time where probably 8 hours of the day I would spend on Twitter. But I think it was important for me to say something, not in response to Reedy or not in response to anyone in particular, but to talk about the attacks on young journalists and the efforts to make it about the juniorization of newsrooms, number one. And number two, to dig in on how mental health of journalism is at stake when you see this mass bullying as I saw it. Now, let's move away from what Reedy particularly said or what anyone particularly said. This is my principal position. Journalism in South Africa is not broken. Why? Journalism in South Africa is lauded among the best in the world. Our investigative journalism is top tier.
It's world awarded by like international excellent committees.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
You go to any editors conference, journalism conference, South Africa is the benchmark. I go to places across the continent to preach about how we have gender parity in our newsrooms and we have a good gender balance in South African newsrooms. We are among the best, right? So this thing of flogging an entire industry based on one or two examples which I can opine that is actually ill-fated because it's not a true sample of the state of journalism. A clip of an interview on Twitter is not a reflection of an entire broadcast, let alone a reflection of an entire industry. Let me paint a picture, Dan. Journalists in South African newsrooms face unprecedented challenges, right? Number one, the industry is recovering from the post-COVID pandemic. The industry is having huge issues around sustainability, particularly because of what big tech has done to disrupt the media landscape. And thirdly, journalism is facing a huge credibility crisis because of some of the big mess-ups that have happened in the past. For example, the Rogue Unit, the decouplettes, you can name them, right? But there's this lazy analysis that the problem with South African media is the juniorization of the newsroom, right? Which I think, on the back foot, is absolute BS.
For those watching who don't know what juniorization of the newsroom is, the idea is that newsrooms are becoming incredibly young and inexperienced because older, wiser, more experienced legendary heads are leaving for broadcast or communications positions. There's a lack of skills or expertise or like basic know-how in the newsrooms. And as journalists get younger and have less apprenticeship basically and development, they're just getting worse.
My thing is this. Is there a problem with the exodus of skills in the newsroom? Yes. The numbers show that people are leaving. It's not sustainable enough, right? But blaming all our problems on the lack of training doesn't take you anywhere, right? And my point is this. It's the public flogging in a public space, in a shebeen like Twitter or X, doesn't have any meaningful
like consequential benefits. Yeah.
So let me tell you, are these problems that we've identified? Of course, right? Young journalists need training. Young journalists need support. Young journalists need tools, right? At the South African National Editors Forum, there's a little bit more of a preemptive approach where we're saying, let's go around. We're literally having workshops every week on different things, whether it's mental health workshops, whether it's election training workshops, whether it is budget reporting workshops to empower journalists. We've just launched a fellowship with Deloitte for business reporting, right? So the point is this. When you are in a position of power, when you're in a position of authority, when you're in a position of skills, why would you want to burn the house down when you actually have something to contribute to help extinguish the fire, to just, continue the metaphor.
Okay, so what you're saying is people like Rudy Klabi, when they come out with these vicious criticisms, almost in a tonal way, like a how it was done way, it doesn't yield any benefit and just allows a public piling on and maybe a damaging of the credibility of journalism as a whole, because it's this indictment of the whole thing.
Absolutely.
Okay.
And so what is, and I mean, the way it was interpreted, and again, I don't want to confine this conversation around a Twitter spat, because I think people can share their opinions. And I think she's right to share her views. But at the same time, we have to listen to the views of people in the newsrooms, where there was a very legitimate response to say, yes, the mic was put before Colleen Makubela, who made some bizarre claims, but it was counted in subsequent bulletins. It was, fact-checked. If you look at what News 24 did in terms of deep reporting, I mean, this was a fire. You're sending young reporters there, reporters that probably the day before were in anything from court cases to protests. You send whoever's available to run to a fire scene.
Yeah, that's part of the problem, though, I think, is that it's like there's this... It's always been in journalism, but I think it's heightened now because first article out is generally the best or most influential article and most read article out. So I imagine you're just trying to get someone there as soon as possible.
Yeah, but let me tell you, Dan, like this sort of sweeping generalization of like everyone wants to be first, and most newsrooms have had moments of reckoning where they realize the importance of quality, the importance of accuracy. All I'm saying is that, yes, mistakes are made, right? But you have to analyze it from the complete picture, right? Is it a problem to stick microphones in the face of politicians who are completely crass? Of course it is. But truthfully speaking, was that all of the sum of the coverage of the day? No.
That's fair.
Right? And so my thing is this. Is the coverage of the fire, does it give an opportunity to train young journalists in crisis reporting? Yes.
Absolutely.
People who are making the criticism can be the ones facilitating those workshops, right? Because if everybody's shouting, who's actually doing the teaching? Because those are the teachers, that older generation. That's why I said, to be honest, you can't blame young journalists for coming into a broken house. It's what they found, what we found. I'm saying what we found, right? So the idea is you cannot blame the person who hasn't been trained for not being trained. Somebody must train them, right? So if I'm sending a reporter with no experience into the field, that's on me.
Yeah, so this was a big chat that came out, is like, surely you should be, if you're going to level, because look, I do understand the perspective, and a lot of people then said this about Rudy Klabi and Zexam Dan, all of these other people, that like, because some people were saying, and I'm not saying that you're saying this, to be clear, but some people were saying like, but like, you should have just like emailed the journalists directly or the editors directly, and I don't really hold with that, because you should be able to, as you said, tweet what you like. Sorry, Steve Biko. I'm sorry to put Elon Musk's nonsense into Steve Biko's quote or his book title. But you should be able to, if you are an industry stalwart, go out there and agenda set to a public what they should expect from an industry.
Yeah.
And I think all journalists do that. All journalists come out and they say, this is what we want for journalism. But one of the things was, why do you criticize the young journalist instead of criticize the handful of bad editors who just want the click soundbite and to be first, or the handful of media companies who are so, I guess, profit clickbait driven that they don't have quality priorities. They've got speed and quantity priorities for news stories.
Or what if your experience, I don't know if the person in question covered a fire or Zexam Dar covered, but what if you offer like a thread of, for journalists covering FOIs, journalists covering the fire,
things to
like my little tidbit, take it or leave it. Can I say to you what I draw exception to? It's not the criticism. You can criticize, but just think about it like this: reporters that went to that fire were underprepared, right? They probably pulled shifts that we could not even imagine, right? You are dealing with this volatile situation where literally politicians are dancing behind cameras waiting for that soundbite, right?
And there are 76 bodies and a burning building. Yeah.
And there's blood where you're sitting, and your editor's screaming for the latest, and it's a lot is happening, right? Just the mental health consideration of covering a fire is massive. I'm not saying that that is a cop-out.
An excuse, yeah.
From general criticism in terms of, don't amplify the voices of politicians. All I'm saying is that you are creating a situation where young journalists who are trying their best are literally just being flogged and are getting disillusioned when you need them to be hungry. You need them to want to, because who's going to do it, right? If those journalists be like, I'm being criticized, I'm tapping out, or you don't win, that thing of you don't win, who's going to do the work?
Yeah.
So the idea is there is a mentoring space, there is a teaching. It was a teaching moment, and that was squandered because I don't believe that those journalists at the scene were not trying their best.
Mm-hmm.
Could they have done better in certain aspects? Of course they. But those within the fraternity, we have to do everything we can to not pour gasoline on a burning house.
Yeah, you don't want journalists to be fearful. I mean, there are a lot of things for journalists to fear in their jobs by nature, but you don't want them to fear getting publicly humiliated and criticized and having their names tarnished. Like I think Heidi Gokos has now had a horrible time in the last few days because it was just kind of assumed that the bigwigs, whether they were talking about her specifically or not, and Rudy Tlabi came out and said that she thinks Heidi has done great work before, so maybe not really, but like the...
But you see, that was my point, Dan, is that by having, big names sort of add their voice to this ugly criticism, it can be distorted into so many ways. It becomes a diversion.
It's a news story in itself.
Yeah, and it's stupid, right? Particularly because, in my newsroom at News 24, Alex Petrick did phenomenal work. She literally got a report of the blow-by-blow of what happened in the 9 hours it took to put out that fire. She spoke to victims. Belinda, our colleague here, they worked tirelessly. Ivan, footage, going to CCTV. And the same with other newsrooms. Real journalism was done, right? But the criticism that comes from an isolated clip and makes judgment of an entire industry is unfair and is destructive. Mm-hmm. So my thing is this. What's the lesson of it? The lesson of this is wherever we can, so lift as you rise. Lift as you rise. Nobody is the custodian of South African journalism. You may have views on it, but work to better the situation.
Sure.
Which is why we literally have editors, Patiswa, who used to be the SABC head of news, going around the country literally doing mental health workshops with SADC, Sanef sending a note to editors, guys, debrief your journalists. Mm-hmm. You literally, in the beginning of the year, you had a Boksburg a gas explosion. Then you had the Rhodes crazy explosion in Joburg. Now you have this fire. Then there was another fire. Journalists are severely traumatized. And then it's resulting in the core problem, which is people leaving the industry, and we're having to take university graduates and send them to serious, big, massive stories because there's no one else to do the job. Mm-hmm. So what do we need to do? We need to beat people up who are already beaten up? No. Mm-hmm. What we need to do is we need to handle them with care, see how we can assist them, and influence a change if a change is necessary.
I was on air during the radio show when this was happening. So it was in the first bulletin, 6 a.m. There was a big story about the fact the mayor was only arriving at 8:30. And it was unclear what was happening. But what I watched unfold in real time with the WhatsApp line and also on social media, particularly on the Hellscape, or the Muskscape, is the immediate bot brigade and the immediate fake news peddlers kick into gear. And what I thought straight away, and look, I knew immediately once I'd seen this fire, it involved a hijacked building, it involved people who may or may not have been South African, but there was this time gap before anyone came out and said, no, there are some South Africans in the building, but there are also immigrants, and we don't know if they're legal or illegal. How can we know? Like, we haven't checked. But there was this window of 3-4 hours where everyone was reading, hijacked building, Nigerian crime lord, illegal immigrants, these illegals, they need to go out. The xenophobia thing happened immediately. And that's why, and I'm not being hard on journalists who didn't prioritize this, and I know some newsrooms did, but I just thought to myself, and look, it's very easy to say this. I wasn't going to see 76 bodies and fight with self-interested politicians who are very good at twisting narratives. But I thought to myself, the one question that has to be answered immediately is, or at least one thing that has to be said is, we don't know if these are immigrants or South Africans. And that's not because that's what we need to prove, but that is the narrative that the truth, which is the project of journalism, the truth we all know is fighting against. And so what saddened me, not just about the Colleen Makubele clip, is that I didn't for a long time see the majority of newsrooms just say the simple thing, we don't know. Sure, there were some interviews with a Zimbabwean or Malawian. We don't know. There were South Africans in that building. And I knew that politicians would say something like that. And for me, I just wish, and again, as you said, we can't slander a whole industry, but I wish every journalist there's first point would have been that, or first question would have been that.
100% taken. But also, let me tell you, the important bit of recording these out of touch, self-interested, selfish politicians is that you have them on record.
Yeah, that's true.
We know what Kumbudzi Ntshavheni thinks now. We know where Herman Mashaba stands, and that's superbly important. Yes, when it's false narratives and fake news, you have to counter it and fact check it in real time. But I get your point that the main thing was to not spur on xenophobia. Can I just caution you to say that social media really is not a good reflection of the conversation.
Agreed.
And any analysis or judgment based on what the biggest talking point is, you would think Busisiwe Mkhwebane is a hero if you have to judge Twitter. Because it's distorted. And we come from Bal Pottinger and the Gupta, so we should know better. And that's why I feel like some of the analysis around the South African media landscape is lazy. Because actually there are serious things that have to be dealt with. I mean, we're talking massive issues around media sustainability. We're talking about community newspapers that journalists who don't have money to go on stories, so sources pay their taxi fee for them to go on stories.
And you had to do that in your own personal journey at a stage, right?
The hustle of trying to build, of trying to pursue the story when you don't have the resources that you need. The South African media landscape is not what it was. It's not as flush. It's not as resourced. You're literally sending out reporters to potentially life-threatening scenes. There's a gas explosion. We don't know if the air quality is safe, but go there with your cell phone and nothing else.
Yeah.
You're lucky if you get a little, what is this?
Voice recorder?
No, the charger, the mobile charger.
Yes. Power bank, yeah.
Power bank. Do you understand
Totally.
the level of what it is that journalists have to contend with? All I'm saying is this. Hitting each other suits the politicians.
100%.
When we busy fighting and mauling each other, they can continue with their disinformation and their misinformation.
And they can talk about journalists disagreeing and some journalists not being good, yeah.
And then they can continue talking their crap. Because what happens is the journalists that are going there are afraid and all of these things.
So I completely take your point about social media not being real life, 100%, and the conversations happening on social media not being real life. My concern is, and I will also say again that I think that this might be an unfair burden to place on journalists in breaking new contexts or rather breaking news context in crime scenes or whatever. But my concern, particularly when I read long comment streams, and it's on TikTok and it's on Instagram, is that very often the clarifying fight back, if it's not in the first clip, no one gets that clip. And that must be a very hard thing for journalists to wrestle with, because Gates and McKenzie will say it's all the immigrants, and then maybe, I can't remember if he's one of these peddling this, but he's like, it's the NGOs, and the NGOs are the problem. And that video gets distributed. And then forget about the Twitter back and forth commentary, the tweet to tweet that happens. That video gets distributed, and the clarifier content to follow from journalists does not get the same reach. And then that's facts. And I know that makes it a very, very unfair burden to place on journalists, but you would hope that, Sakina Kamwendo did a great interview with Gates McKenzie 4 months ago, where she took him to task in the moment. So sure, the clip can go out, but it's got that
context.
Just wait, you might be wrong. Just wait, you might be wrong. Just wait, you might be wrong. And it must be really hard to be a journalist right now, thinking that you need to actually somehow do that in the interview at the very beginning.
We have to contend with the fact that we need to be right before we need to be first. And that's the difficulty.
Sure.
We had to do the Mkhwebane hearings, the Busisi Mkhwebane impeachment hearings, where a whole lot of absolute lies were said almost every single day. It was
overwhelming.
Terrible.
Yeah.
And Jan Gerber, our reporter in Parliament, sat with a live update. And every time he recorded that Darlene Mpofu said X, would fact check him in the moment and say, but actually the court said Y. Or actually, this is what the law said. Yesterday, for example, Paul Mashatile was before Parliament, and he said he can't talk about his bodyguards beating up people because the matter's sub judice, right? So you'd report, as a young reporter, you'd be like, Paul Mashatile said it's sub judice. But Jan was like, it's an archaic law. The court ruled that Parliament cannot use sub judice to circumvent accountability. Da, 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 da.
He's using it to dodge the question.
Yeah.
Sure.
But you have to say it, and again, you have to do it in the moment, in the context. So you're absolutely right. The burden of the truth is so much heavier now. But I have never ever seen any successful effort to correct when it comes with a whipping. I haven't seen that. It only creates fear. It doesn't change behavior.
For sure.
I may be wrong, but my approach is more constructive, which is why Monday morning or Monday afternoon in our SANF meeting, we said, guys, let's send out this thing, remind people we have resources, get reporters into, we're having a workshop coming up soon. These are the tools. Empowerment.
For sure.
Lift as we rise. 100%. I know that sounds cliche, but
no, it's great.
Who's gonna do the work? Are you gonna do the work?
I'm gonna sit here with my microphone. No, you're exactly right. I completely agree with you. I know we're about to run out of time. I have one more question. Do you mind?
Sure.
Okay. Final question, and this is because I think that we've really dealt with the scandal, but now I'm just interested. Because of the rise of video and the rise of live and that, has it caused a weird thing where journalists now feel pressured to be good performers of live interviews in the moment? Because the shift of a kind of reporting on the story has gone to what's the video clip? Whereas I guess before there was a greater maybe variety. I could be wrong. That's what I'm asking. But like a variety of journalists. Some who ask the questions and then go write and research. But people are now very, very beholden to the video with the faces talking.
So I think that the immediacy of journalism has changed things a lot, right? So it's in the now. There's no time to contextualize. There's no time to package. There's no time to put things into perspective because everyone's rolling everything live, right? And that creates massive challenges, right? So for example, the decision to take a Julius Malema press conference live when you know there's going to be misinformation spread. What is the editorial decision that has to So the pressure on journalists are at an all-time high because there's pressures from different quarters. So the pressure to go viral, the pressure to ask the tough question, the pressure to first of all to get the newsmaker to speak to you. All of these things are superbly important and very different to when I started or our predecessors there.
Which makes me think quite carefully when older stalwart heads who came up in like the mid-2000s or whatever have hot takes, because sure, like intellectually they might know that these are now the challenges, but experientially they actually don't know in a real way what it is like to be a journalist in South Africa today.
Yeah, and you cannot ask anything of the Joburg mayor because literally he has a whisperer
fixer,
on the one hand and someone on the other hand trying to block,
keep him safe.
But also to block him from literally even looking in the direction of journalists. And when he does,
that's what I mean. Keep him safe from the journalists.
Oh yeah. but also talking heads, like literally whispering in his ears as he talks to the media. These are things we've never experienced before.
Yeah.
And so my thing is this: the landscape has changed. Everything's quicker. Everything's faster. Yes, there has to be a realization that the tenets of journalism must remain, which is free and fair, no prejudice, ethical journalism. All of those things are never going to die.
Okay.
The mediums might change. You're going to have to do your work a little faster. I mean, there are some journalists who literally say they would go out, Dan, sit the whole day in council, right? Write their story in a book, go to the call box, phone the newsroom at 5 o'clock, send that one single 400-word story, and then go to the pub.
Wow, that's a nice life.
Do you know what is the requirement? I am an editor that assigns journalists to council. You go to council. You must have a live blog, meaning minute-by-minute update. You must shoot picture of when they're mooring each other. I'm allowed to say mooring.
Please say it again. I love that. This is the internet.
Right? So you have to get a picture. You have to get a video of
hot moment
of Kenny Kanene, sipping on moe in the middle of a council sitting. You have to then write the breaking news story that says council decides X, and you have to run to the door to get a doorstop so that you can have an exclusive for tomorrow morning.
Yeah, it's a lot of work.
Dude.
It's completely different.
Dude.
Yeah.
It's not a joke.
No, you're right.
And so just don't burn the house down. Let's fix it. It's fixable. Let's fix it.
So, what did you think? That was Qaanitah in conversation with... Damn it. So that's the issue with South African journalism. Thank you so much for watching my conversation with Qaanitah Hunter. Please let us know what you think of it in the comments. As always, the issue with Dan Corder will be back next week with a brand new episode. Don't forget to like and subscribe. And also, if you want to get the podcast version of this show, go and find us on Spotify. Thank you so much for watching. We'll be back in a week.